Hey everybody, it's Audrey from Audrey Approved. Welcome or welcome back. Today I'm going to do another one of my nonfiction recommendation videos where I pick a certain subject or theme and I talk about some books that I've read in the recent past that have to do with that theme. So today's video is going to be books from or within the depths of the deep sea. Now I say this every video, but I really like this subject, obviously, or else I wouldn't have read so many books within this particular kind of like subgenre. But you know, I've always really liked reading about the deep sea or learning about the deep sea. Whenever I watch nature documentaries, I always go straight for the ones about the ocean first. And so if you feel similarly, then you might want to stick around, and I hope you enjoy some of the recommendations that I have for you today. The first book that I want to talk about today is the one that's actually come out the most recently, and that is The Underworld: Journeys to the Depths of the Ocean by Susan Casey, which is the second book by Casey that I've read this year. It's the fourth one that she's released. And right off the bat, I'll say that I'm going to plan to read all four of her books because I really enjoy Susan Casey as an author, and her subjects always have to do with something about the ocean. This, out of all the books that I'm talking about today, descends the deepest into the seas, and it really focuses on the submersibles and the sea craft and the people that have gone to, you know, the darkest parts of the sea and what they've found there. And it focuses a lot in the kind of Hadal zone, which is, you know, the deepest part of the ocean where literally, you know, no light can penetrate. There are certain things that I really like in my nonfiction, especially my nonfiction that is about, you know, the natural world. I really like books that kind of have the scientists themselves or the explorers themselves be a part of the narrative. So I don't want to know just the facts. I also want to know about the people that are figuring out the facts and taking that a step further. I also really like it when the authors themselves take part in the learning within their storyline. So, you know, Susan Casey in this book is an active character within her own kind of nonfiction arc, and we cover, you know, her thoughts and feelings as well as kind of the histories and the experiences of all the different scientists and explorers of the deep. In the other book of hers that I read this year, which was The Devil's Teeth, which is about the Farallon Islands off the coast of San Francisco, I think I mentioned that Susan Casey just happens to seem really lucky. Like, she gets herself into situations that are really good for her. I'm not quite sure how she gets herself into these situations, but I felt a similar way in this book because Casey manages to get a ride on a deep sea submersible that drops, I think, like 17,000 feet to the bottom of like a Hawaiian volcano. And so she talks about what it's like to be in a submersible. And I think not very many people with such poetic language and writing capability have done that. And so I listened to the audiobook, listening to her talk about what, you know, the deepest parts of the oceans look like was really beautiful and haunting and emotional. And I think it was a wonderful end to this book, and I would highly recommend this piece as a whole. There's a little bit of overlap in subject with the next book that I want to talk about, which is Deep: Freediving, Renegade Science, and What the Ocean Tells Us About Ourselves by James Nestor. And while The Underworld by Susan Casey focuses almost entirely on the deep sea, I would say that Deep is a focus on three things. It's a focus on the depths of the ocean. So each chapter kind of subsequently takes you down the water column. So you move into different topics as you move, you know, through the different books, or through the different chapters of the book. It's also a story about freediving, which is diving without any sort of equipment. So it's just diving to depths, sometimes like 300 feet, you know, over the course of a few minutes, and what that is like, what that kind of sport industry looks like, and what, you know, how you would go about becoming a free diver. And the third kind of thing that this book focuses on is just marine biology. And I think, thinking about this as a whole, this is a pretty short book. It's only like 7 hours in audio format, which is relatively short for a piece of nonfiction. And so it tries to do a lot within a few amount of pages. When it comes to a book about the deep sea, you should check out The Underworld instead. And I think when it comes to marine biology, what this book did for me was it pushed me to kind of pick up other books in the subject. So I really want to get to, I think it's called Fathoms by Rebecca Griggs, which I think is about whales, because there's a whole bunch of stuff within Deep about whales and how whales communicate. But I think where this book was unique and where I got really new content from it was in the freediving portion. So this was my favorite aspect of Deep. I think one last thing I would mention about the book, though, is that the subtitle even says it. It says Renegade Science. And, you know, while Susan Casey in the Underworld goes and talks to all of these kind of university professors or leaders of different kind of institutes, James Nestor goes and talks to, like, citizen scientists. And I think that's cool because, you know, not everybody can be part of a research group or a research initiative. It's really expensive to do research in the ocean. But on the other hand, I feel like the term renegade science can also be interpreted as science that is not peer-reviewed and is not kind of judged by others within the field. And there's a reason why good science, in my opinion, is always peer-reviewed. And so I was a little bit like, I don't know, not hesitant, but a little suspicious maybe of some of the people that he talked to and the conclusions that they reach. I just wish that there was maybe more of a nuanced approach to look at that type of research. A book with an incredibly similar title is The Deep, not Deep, but The Deep, Hidden Wonders of Our Oceans and How We Can Protect Them by Alex Rogers. And Alex Rogers is a professor of biology at, I think, Oxford. More than a history of the deep sea, it's a vocational memoir. This book covers Alex Rogers and his life growing up as like a young boy and how he got into oceanography and all the different kind of works and projects and initiatives that he's worked on. You know, there's different chapters on ocean acidification, on coral bleaching, on deep sea fishing, on plastics, and these are all important subjects, but the delivery is so boring. You can really tell that Alex Rogers is an academic, and I don't mean that as a compliment. You know, for a book that aims to kind of teach people and I think inspire people to take better care of the ocean, this kind of just felt like the author talking about all the things that he's done. And so if you want to be an oceanographer, maybe this would be a good book because you get a bit of a sense of what I would say a successful oceanographer's life looks like. But I think that if you're looking for content about the ocean or about the deep sea, like the cover would imply, this is one to pass. The remaining books that I want to talk about for this video are books that have to do with mysteries, I guess, that take place within the deep sea. So the first is Shadow Divers, The True Adventure of Two Americans Who Risked Everything to Solve One of the Last Mysteries of World War II by Robert Carson, which is a really long subtitle for a book. But this is a crazy story. This is about two scuba divers living on, I think, in New Jersey. And in 1991, they discover this U-boat or German submarine that is sunk off the coast of New Jersey, like 60 miles off the coast of New Jersey. And nobody knows why or how or when the U-boat went down. So there's all these mysteries to do with it, you know. Why aren't there any records of this? Who shot it down, or how did it, you know, sink itself? You know, what was it doing when it was so close to American shorelines? And so the two scuba divers featured in this book kind of gather this group of, you know, professional divers. They try to solve this mystery. If you like military history, if you're a fan of scuba diving or of submarines, then you might like this piece. And actually, even if you don't like any of those things, you still might like this piece because I think it's a wonderful piece of narrative nonfiction that reads like a suspenseful fiction book, but it is all true. And then lastly, I want to talk about A Fish Caught in Time, The Search for the Coelacanth by Samantha Weinberg, which is a book that we read for Comoros for this Read the World project, and is a horrible book. It's a horrible book if you want to learn about Comoros, but it is a great book if you want to learn about a lost fish. Stay with me for a minute. This is all about the coelacanth. The coelacanth is a fish that is found in the fossil record. I think it's found in fossils that are like, you know, 100 million years old. For the longest time, people thought they were extinct. You can see where I'm going with this. And people were really interested, you know, paleontologists and evolutionary biologists were really interested in this fish because it has all these like extra limbs, all these extra fins. And people thought that maybe this was perhaps a precursor to you know, the species that move from aquatic to terrestrial life. I talked about another book on this subject, you know, in my last video. But lo and behold, one of these fish exists. Actually, a whole population of these fish exist. And so this is the story of how the coelacanth was rediscovered, this living fossil. I would call this more a piece of popular history than popular science. It's very light, I would say, on like biology or even like evolutionary biology and stuff like that. But it is a story of the people who, you know, first came across this fish again, specifically this like young female museum curator in South Africa, and all of the challenges with preserving fish at this time period. I think this is in the early 20th century. Anyway, it's just a crazy story about a subject that I never would come across on my own. So I really appreciated finding this book through that reading project. And then lastly, I sometimes like to end these videos with books on the subject that are still on my TBR. So I'm gonna keep reading about this subject, and of course I'd like recommendations from y'all, but these are ones that are still on my radar. So the first is The Boundless Sea, A Human History of the Oceans, which is 1,100 pages on the history of the ocean, but through the lens of, I guess, human interaction with the ocean. Another one that I think there's like a movie, there's a really bad looking movie coming out on this subject, but it is Big Meg, the story of the largest, fiercest, and most mysterious shark, which is all about the megalodon. Again, I like, obviously, ancient fish, and so I think sharks count as fish, if I remember correctly. Maybe that's incorrect, but along the similar veins. And then I had also mentioned at the beginning that I really like Susan Casey's books, and so Susan Casey has 2 more books I need to get to. One is about waves and riding big waves, and the other is about dolphins. As always, thank you for watching. Let me know if you have any books on the subject that you would recommend, and I'll see you next time.